afternoon to everyone and to our distinguished speakers, and welcome to this webinar on COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials in the Philippines. This event is brought to you by the Department of Health, the Department of Science and Technology, the DOST-Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Alpha Phi Omega Fraternity ETA chapter. I am Jayo Kakal from UP Diliman, and I will be your host for today, together with my co-hosts. Our respectable speakers will be delivering messages regarding COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials to be conducted in the country. The topics to be covered are introduction to vaccines, COVID-19 vaccine trials, and vaccine trials in the Philippines. Okay, let's go ahead and start the webinar. Our first speaker is a professor emeritus at the College of Medicine, University of the Philippines, Manila. She is the former Vice Chancellor for Research and the Executive Director of the National Institutes of Health, University of the Philippines, Manila, and the current head of the Vaccine Study Group of the NIH UPM. Her work has earned her various national and international honors and awards in the professional, academic, and research fields, including the Outstanding Physician in 2009 and the prestigious Dr. Jose P. Rizal Memorial Award for Academe in 2011. Given by the Philippine Medical Association, the 2012 Asian Outstanding Pediatrician Award, given by the Asia Pacific Pediatric Association, the Centennial Outstanding Researcher by the UP Pediatrics in 2016, and the 2018 Outstanding Professional in Medicine, given by the the Professional Regulation Commission. As a vaccine advocate, she was named Pneumonia Fighter in 2018 by the Just Actions Organization, a US-based movement and corporation associated with people empowerment. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome the director of the Philippine Foundation for Vaccination, Dr. Lulu C. Bravo. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. Jayo, thank you for the nice introduction. And I was looking over our participants list, and I don't really see many doctors there, or at least those I know who are coming from the pediatrics and the infectious diseases. So I am assuming that many of our participants are primary doctors, students, and maybe even media or people who are interested in vaccine. So I guess I will have to be as simple and as hopefully as understandable as possible. So with that, I'd like now to share my screen with you. And this is what I have right now. I was asked to talk about, okay, my title is supposedly, let me see. Okay, I'm now sharing my screen. And I hope this is an up title for all of you here listening. I entitled it Vaccines and Vaccination, the Basic Facts, which you need in order to analyze and understand how vaccine trials will have to go through, okay? And this is my disclosure. I've undertaken researches for the University of the Philippines, Manila, from various companies, GSK and blah, blah, blah. Now, the objectives for this afternoon, as I have been told, is to review the scientific basis for vaccination. How does a vaccine work, right? And then from the question that I was asked to answer from the advanced question and answer, I was taught to talk about misconceptions and, what are these things that people believe may not really be true. Okay, so list the common misconceptions about vaccine and then look at what the barriers for vaccination is all about. We all know that vaccination, or at least I know that vaccination is the most cost-effective measure to prevent diseases, to prevent infectious diseases. And yet people are still doubting sometimes what vaccines are all about. So I'm hope that at the end of this session, we will all come home with saying vaccination save lives. And the fourth one is, how do you really improve vaccine confidence? If we want people to really go and trust again our government and our clinical trials and all those things that they give us right and left, how do we do that? And how do we say that our country is going to become a vaccine resilient country? Because right now, I can tell you this, I will start off by saying that right now, the Philippines leads all Asian countries in terms of the #1 vaccine hesitancy in the Asia Pacific region. That's not a good title. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me now tell you in review how do vaccines work. Now, there are two kinds of vaccination. It's called an active immunity or active vaccination or immunization, and the other one is passive. When you say it's active immunization, it means that you give something to a person to be able to protect him by that person producing from his own system the antibodies, the immune globulins, those substances that he needs in order to prevent himself. And that is what we call active. These antibodies are developed after the infection also if you get a natural infection. Supposing you did not get vaccinated, but there is an organism that comes to your body and the vaccine and and this organism start doing an infection. So you now develop certain antibodies to fight that infection so that you will survive. Because if you do not let your immune system fight this infection, it can overwhelm you and can actually be fatal. And some of those diseases that are very contagious, very infectious, very severe can actually be very fatal. And then an active immunization is usually long term. But of course, there are immunity that may not be long term. And even now with the COVID, we don't know whether the immunity that one person who gets the infection can have will really be a long one, because it takes time before you develop or you actually understand how the immunity works in one's body. And right now, we only have about 9 months studying the COVID. So we don't know whether the long-term immunity will be developed after you get the infection. Now, there is such a thing as a passive immunity. The passive immunity is by transferring to the person the human or animal substances that actually can protect them. And these are usually your synthetic immune globulins or their convalescent plasma. That is an example. You know, in the COVID, they say you can use convalescent plasma to cure. Why? Because the convalescent plasma has many antibodies in the blood, which is being transferred from the donor to the patient who is ill, right? So that's convalescent. But the passive immunity is usually very temporary and it usually wanes with time. And the more that you will know about this is when you study most of this action that takes place after you give your immune globulins. Okay, so now we go to what do we really, what really happens when a vaccine now, which is not the natural infection, it is the substance that you inject or you have administered to a person in order to produce a seemingly natural infection, but with less complication. You see, when you do a natural infection or a vaccination, it actually comes up with what we call immunity. Both of them, whether you get a natural infection or a vaccination, your goal is to produce that immunity. And this immunization, however, if you are going to be vaccinated, is something that the vaccinee will not endure any illness, meaning to say that although the patient seems to have formed this immunity, he will not get severe infection or he will not get the illness. And then presumably it has a low risk of uh, complications, just as a natural infection will do. And so we really need to have a vaccination in order to avoid a natural infection that, if very severe, can really lead to fatal or complications that will, produce even disability. And this natural immunity that would follow recovery are actually what we want to achieve. Now, the ideal vaccine, as we have mentioned, should always be safe. That is the number one consideration, because you're giving it usually to a healthy infant or a healthy individual, and you don't want them to get any harm, right? So it should be safe as the primary requirement, and it should be highly effective and optimally induce a what we call sterilizing immunity. In other words, yes, the long-term immunity that we want, it should actually be able to avoid, and all of those natural results of an infection will be lost if you give your vaccine. Now, secondarily, a vaccine should not be expensive, because if it is expensive, then only a few or only the rich and famous will be able to get it. And that is not what we want. We want a vaccine that can produce equity. It can be given to everyone so that everyone could be protected. Poor, rich, underserved, boys, girls, young and old. And we need a vaccine that should cost definitely, hopefully, less than what we can afford, right? Or we can afford. All right, so this one is preferably also easily administered. And of course, the best one is an oral vaccine. But unfortunately, not many vaccine can be given orally. And most of them are injectable. But for those oral, like oral polio, it's easily given in a massive approach, because all you need to do is just put it in your mouth and that's it. So it should also be stable in a heated environment. The Philippines is a tropical country, and in a hot or humid climate, some vaccines can easily lose potency. And this is a very big problem, because everywhere you need a vaccine that will be able to be in cold chain. If you put it in a room temperature, it can get sour and it will be actually bad. It will lose its potency. Of course, it has to be hopefully multivalent, meaning that it can go to as many serotypes if ever, or it can actually cover as many serotypes or many strains possible, that will eventually cover a long and a more wider, broader spectrum of diseases. And of course, it should also be long-lived immunity. Unfortunately, some vaccines are also waning after 1 year, 2 years, like flu, and in some cases, like pertussis, tetanus, it may wane within 4 to 6 years. And that's the reason why you give boosters. Now, you will say that vaccine should be safe. What does safe mean? It means there should be no harm from the disease. However, no vaccine is 100% safe, and definitely also no vaccine can be 100% effective. Meaning when you give it, it can protect everyone 100%. No way. The vaccine that has the highest efficacy, mind you, is polio. It has about 99.9% efficacy. But that's the highest, polio. Now, for other vaccines, it would range between 50% to 90% or 95%, meaning to say there is a margin, a percentage where the vaccines will not be effective to some people who may have some immune defects, or some people who's genetically not able to respond to the vaccine. So it cannot be 100%. And at the same time, it cannot also be 100% safe, right? So remind parents when you are talking about vaccines that even if this is the case, no 100%, if you don't vaccinate and you don't want to take the risk, then it will be like a disaster also. Because when we say safe, it also means being able to preserve you from real danger, to avoid that danger. In this sense, vaccines are safe because the danger they prevent, the diseases, far outweighs the side effects that they represent. And that is why you all see this very important picture of the benefit. It is like a way, a balance where the benefit of a vaccine must always outweigh the risk, the small risk. But these are always calculated risks. And it is the scientist, it is the best of the scientists who usually makes the initial decision to say whether this vaccine has benefits that far outweigh the risk. It is the DSMB that will be talked about later by Dr. Montoya on his clinical trials, which in the new vaccines, if you are doing clinical trials, it is the Data Safety Monitoring Board, the first board that actually looks at whether a vaccine has benefits that will far outweigh the risk. The risk is always computed, calculated in a sense that it will give much more than the risk that it will be able to be seen. Okay, so now this is something that we have all been worried about because through the last years, and it actually started in 1998 when a British doctor started his MMR vaccine relating it to autism. That was in 1998. And 16 years later, this doctor, Andrew Wakefield, has done remarkable damage to the vaccine world. He has been actually debarred, or how do you call it? He was delicensed. He actually emerged from Britain. He's a British, but he actually, because he was really disgraced in Britain, he went to Texas. And now he is actually spreading his myth about MMR and autism now in Texas. And the Texans also don't like him, but he's still there. And, you know, he's really someone who has made a remarkable damage to the vaccine because from the time on, these anti-vaxxers started to emerge and they came out with so many fake news and misinformation and disinformation that some of us who are quite gullible enough are getting it hook, line, and sinker. So they say, okay, vaccines can actually cause not just autism, it can cause multiple sclerosis, it can cause Guillain-Barré and so many other things that I must tell you has not been evidence-based and has not provided any evidence to the contrary. So ladies and gentlemen, if you see in your social media and in all of your sharing something on fake news about vaccines, please don't share it. You have to be more diligent in looking at the WHO reliable sources in order to say that this is something that should be shared because it is factual, because most of the time it is not. There are so many fake news that is ongoing, like putting a substance that causes sterilization in a vaccine or causing abortifacient, oral polio and tetanus toxin causing abortifacient, something like that. Those are all fake news and hopefully you will not share them. In fact, Facebook has tried to remedy this by removing some of these anti-vaxxers in the Facebook. But somehow, still there are many people who still become, I don't know what their interests are, but definitely please don't share those kind of things. Another misconception that we hope that you will also think about is that vaccine are actually commercial and really wants us to spend for. I mean, I have heard this many, many times that people, the industry just like to get uh, a lot of money from vaccine. Let me tell you this. I have been studying vaccine. I went to many vaccination seminars and even a kind of long-standing conferences. The first thing I heard about vaccine is that vaccine only has less than 5% of the total market of the world today in terms of drugs and all the medicines that you use. Less than 5% is the value of vaccines. And yet, did you know that vaccines, aside from clean water supply, is credited for 95% of global health today? You know, this is something that we don't sometimes realize, that many industry are just before COVID actually are trying to get away from vaccines because a lot of people are just going for anti-vaccine and doing this. And if we do not do something, you know, many of these companies are really not going to do anything anymore because they're being criticized. They're being, you know, vaccines are supposed to be for the underserved, for the poor. And they try actually to try and get those vaccines prices down. However, you know that research in vaccine is very expensive. And for every 100 vaccine that is being developed, only 1 or 2 will go into commercial development, which means that the cost of research in vaccine is so high that when it comes out in a commercial quantity, it's gonna be difficult. It's gonna be expensive. And people, and sometimes industry actually do not have the same profit as they do for drugs that actually treat hypertension, diabetes, cholesterol. These are the ones that cost a lot, and these are the ones that actually are being high on the market value. So I hope, you know, you will realize what vaccines are really going through before they reach your destination. Okay, adverse events. This is something that we all hope will be understood by everyone, because many times people say, oh, this must have been caused by the vaccine, because they say adverse event is any medical event following vaccination. Of course, anything can happen after you are being given a vaccine, right? You can even get a vaccine and then suddenly you cross the street and you got run over by, you know, or you get bumped by someone. And that is an adverse event because you could have been developing a concussion or something like that. And it is still an event following immunization. So it could be a true adverse reaction, which means that there is really a side effect to the vaccine, or it could be an unintended effect caused by the vaccine. Like for example, oo nga, nahilo ka after vaccination and then you fell on the ground. Okay, that in itself is an adverse reaction because you felt dizzy and then you fell down and you had a concussion. And it may be a true adverse reaction then. But it could also be coincidental if someone bumped you and then you fell on the floor and then you got the concussion. So that is coincidental, but it's still an adverse event following your immunization. So there are many things that develop after you get a vaccine that you have to understand. And some people think that, you know, this is easy. It's not easy to understand what all this adverse event following immunization is all about. Even if you get sick, like you get a malignancy after having a vaccine, is that due to the vaccine? Is that related to a vaccine? That is where the DSMB, the Data Safety Monitoring Board, look at. Those are the things that before a vaccine gets licensed, these people, the scientists, look at before they say this is okay, this is a vaccine whose benefits far outweigh the risk. And that is a standard procedure for all vaccines that go into commercial use. Okay, so what we say is after any vaccine and something happens, it cannot be just related to the vaccine, as I said, because temporal association does not prove causation. And I'm telling you this because this has been the cause of many vaccine hesitancy that has been produced, because the anti-vaxxer will always say this, that something happens after you get vaccinated, and then they say this is due to the vaccine. This is something that you really have to understand. And just because one event follows another does not mean that the first caused the second, right? So let's go on. What are the true vaccine adverse reaction that have been observed, that have been documented, and already placed in the literature of all of this vaccine? Okay, this one are true vaccine adverse reaction that you can observe after giving the vaccine. What are these? For BCG, you have injection site reaction, you can have lymphadenitis, you can have a disseminated disease, right? Because BCG is a live vaccine. And there have been occasions where a child who may have an immunocompromised condition can actually develop a sort of a disease like TB, tuberculosis, because he is immunocompromised and it causes disseminated disease. Okay, how about whole cell pertussis vaccine? Oh my, this is something that has been debated upon before, because many countries like Japan was the first one, and the US and Europe will not use anymore whole cell pertussis vaccine, although it is one of the cheapest vaccine, because it can cause all of these side effects, not just local systemic pain, swelling, but it can also cause systemic reactions like anorexia, persistent screaming, irritability, seizure, encephalopathy is one of the worst, of course. And sometimes what we call the HHE, hyporesponsive, hypotensive episode, which if a mother does not actually see, can also cause aspiration in a baby who is vomiting and asleep. And this has happened before. I've been in one of those seminars where a baby died because of aspiration, having an HHE, because the mother didn't realize that the child had started to become hypotensive, hyporesponsive, and aspirated right after, or at least within 24 hours after the vaccine was given, which is the whole cell DPT before, right? And we still are using DPT, but this is very, very, very rare, as I said. Okay, and we do have the OPV with a reaction, which is a vaccine acquired or vaccine-derived poliomyelitis, because again, it is a live vaccine. So when you have a live vaccine, sometimes in patients who are immunocompromised or not really having a good immune system, can actually become, can also suffer from polio, right? And these are also some of them, from hepatitis B, from tetanus, from mumps, for measles. You can even have anaphylactic shock, 1 out of 1 million doses. For rubella, you can have arthralgia, acute arthritis. So there are many, and these are all being observed during the initial things, what they see among all the vaccines that are being tested. All right. Now, we say that the reactions could be very common if it is more than 10% of the time that it happens in a person, or in persons who are being given the vaccine, or it could be common if you have 1 to 10%. It is uncommon when you have a percentage of 0.1% to less than 1%, and rare if it is 0.01 to 0.1, and very, very rare if it is less than 0.1, or what we will call 1 per 10,000. That's very rare. And as I said, some of these could also be very, very, very rare, like anaphylactic shock in 1:1 million, which happens in MMR. And some of the polio, they do have this very, very rare. But as I said, when the benefits far outweigh the risk, you don't neglect the 999,999 people who can be benefited for one possible risk of anaphylactic shock. But there's a caveat there. The DOH has always made it clear that those who are trained in vaccination must be able to recognize early what anaphylactic shock is, so that they can manage if it happens. See, the thing here is you have to be able to manage and be able to recognize whatever um, adverse event might happen. And that is the difference between someone who just give vaccines without knowing the details of vaccination and someone who have the proper training in vaccination or vaccinology. Okay, we talked about what a vaccine uh, actual adverse event is. You correlate it with the risk of your adverse event. And there is a formula between those who were given the vaccine and those who were not given the vaccine. And then you correlate it if those who were vaccinated got this adverse event or disease, and those not vaccinated who got the disease, and you compare if the rate of the disease appears higher in those who were vaccinated compared to those who are not vaccinated, then you say, oh, it looks really kind of suspicious. And you might say, okay, the vaccinated ones have more of the disease than those not vaccinated. And there is that formula. Like in the MMR and autism, it showed, in fact, that it was equal, 0.98, almost one. That means vaccinated or not vaccinated, you see the autistic syndrome. So it does not actually lend itself to saying that autism is found among MMR vaccinees, right? So that is a standard procedure, and that's the simplest one that we can say when you are thinking about the adverse event following immunization. Now, of course, we also show that this target for vaccine coverage is important, as you can see here. You can see that there is a threshold. We want herd immunity. We want those who may not have been vaccinated to also be protected. And how do we do that? By producing a threshold where there is herd immunity. And that is measles should be able to get 95% immunity among the population, as you can see here, 92 to 94% threshold, so that those who are not vaccinated can still be protected. This is what we now call the idea behind having our population given 95 measles coverage. All the others, and of course, all the others, the higher the number that you give, the higher the protective rate that you can give to those people who were not able to get vaccinated. So let me just review what vaccination has done in the last 200 years of vaccination. 3 million lives saved. And this is every year. Can you imagine during the Middle Ages when there are no vaccines, they don't name the children until they reach 5 years old because half of them will die. Oh, you can look at that up because that is true. In the Middle Ages, half of the people will die before they reach 5 years. Now, how many? In the Philippines, we reached MDG4 in 2015 by saying that we reduced our mortality for less than 5 years by 2/3 from 1990. And that was a creditable thing for our Department of Health to have been able to achieve MDG4 in 2015. But you have to also review why were we able to do that? And we have to see the facts about benefits of vaccination. And these are the ones that I got from WHO, and this is being shown all over. Vaccines can protect against related diseases, even if you say, okay, I will just vaccinate against measles. But then measles can actually also avoid the complications of pneumonia and malnutrition and dysentery, right? And even diarrhea. Vaccines extend life expectancy. Oh no, you know this very well because with vaccines, we now have elderly population going into 90s and 100, whereas during the Middle Ages, life expectancy was just in the 40s, 30 to 40 years of age. Okay, countries can save costs through vaccination. Of course, vaccine is an investment in health. And I don't have so much time. I'm looking at my watch. But let me say that there are now vaccines that can prevent cancer. And there are more vaccines coming into the market later on that can protect against breast cancer. Now we have hepatic cancer to be prevented by hepatitis B. We have cervical cancer protected by HPV. In the future, you'll see breast cancers, you'll see even stomach cancer, gastric cancer. This will all be in the pipeline. One of the things that's so important is vaccines enhance equity. You know, there are many poor children in the world. And it is only the giving of vaccines that can protect them. They don't have the money to spend for medical expenses. But vaccines can still save them from all of these medical expenses and medical costs. And definitely, vaccines also has a role in avoiding antibiotic resistance, because if you don't get sick and you don't take a lot of antibiotics, then we are not going to have a lot of antibiotic resistance. And we know that by 2030 to 2050, half of those who will get infected will die because they are no longer able to respond to antibiotics because of resistance. So this is something to think about also. Vaccines promote safe travel and mobility. You know, in the Hajj, they will not permit you to go there if you are not vaccinated, right? And when we had a polio outbreak, nobody was asked, nobody had to, those who were traveling were supposed to get a polio vaccination before they can go anywhere else. You know, this is something that we are so embarrassed about, that after 19 years of vaccine free or polio free, we were declared again an outbreak for polio, and we are still suffering from that. Of course, vaccines empower women. If you have healthy family, women can still have more time for themselves and, of course, save money for other things, like even their own kind of recreation. Vaccines promote peace. There have been many ceasefire because oral polio was supposed to be given in Pakistan during the conflict, and these are done in conflict areas. And of course, one of the things that you now realize, vaccination can contribute to economic growth. Remember, right now everybody's looking for the COVID vaccine because otherwise our economy is down. Nobody can work. Without the vaccine, no one can be confident enough to work, right? So this is what is bad about our confidence. So vaccines work, but still, as I told you earlier, we are a country who is now suffering from vaccine hesitancy. And this is all because of the finding that we have lost confidence, we have become complacent, and we thought that home-to-home visit or house-to-house visit is more convenient for us, so we don't have to go to the health center to get vaccination. And that all contributes to vaccine hesitancy. Look at this. Look at what happened to our immunization coverage from 2013 to 2018. It has gone way up. And then starting 2015, 2017, it's starting to go down. And by 2018, we have reached bottom pit. I am so dismayed when this happened. And this is all because of 3 C's. Not cancer, mind you, not the big C. It's much more complex and much more specific than that. This is what we now call the complacency, which exists when you perceive risk of vaccine preventable diseases are low. You don't see measles anymore. So you don't think, it will hit you until it hit hard and cause 500 deaths. You don't think that vaccination is no longer necessary because you don't see the disease. And that is really lamentable. And then convenience. Our DOH always goes house to house when you don't want to go to the health center. Oh my God, you want that because you don't have to go and run. And I can see some mothers who are just there not doing nothing and yet not able to go to the health center. That's too bad because they don't appreciate no longer the immunization services. And of course, this is something that we are really suffering from, the loss of trust, the loss of confidence in vaccine. And I can tell you, I know some of you know this very well, why we lost confidence in our government's vaccination program in 2017. I don't have to go through that. But I can tell you these 3 C's are very important: complacency, convenience, and confidence. These are what WHO says. And if you need to know again what happened, think about what happened in 2017, 2018, when we had the Dengvaxia issue. Amidst the noise, the controversy, the complacency, vaccination value got lost, and our vaccine confidence, which was very high in 2015, 93%, plummeted to 32%, causing measles outbreak last year. 500 died. Did you know in 2005 we did not have a measles case? We did not have any death from measles from 2005 to 2010, and now 2019 we had more than 500 deaths from measles. That is really lamentable. And with this, we realize that there is a need to restore public trust, confidence, and accountability on vaccination among healthcare workers and institutions. We need to communicate the value of vaccination and the consequences of non-vaccination to individuals, families, tourism, security, and economy. We need to heighten the understanding about the safety and efficacy of vaccines, including those in the national vaccine programs. And of course, we need to increase appreciation for vaccination, the scientists, the hardworking people, the vaccine trialists, and the people behind this, while dispelling the myths in the process. Because facts and education alone are not enough to restore vaccine confidence. There's a big gap, and you know all that. When you share those misinformation and disinformation, that is what happens. We need to have a positive vaccination conversation. We need to talk. You can ask all your questions after I give my talk, which should be ending by now. But please listen to the experts, listen to the scientists, because this is where we can still save our children. We don't have to mandate them to get immunization, but we have to convince them in such a manner as talking to them, communicating to them, advocating what needs to be done, listening to them. And as I said, this may not be easy because there are so many things. And I really appreciate that the APO fraternity is hosting this. I hope you can also be useful in the way that this conversation will flow, because I know the Mu sorority of the College of Medicine of the UP has also been doing a lot of immunization. They have this program already more than 10 years, going to the grassroots and talking about immunization among the community. This is what I want our youth to have, because building alliance and advocacy as a unified voice is being shared by not just our national scientists. Do you see our national scientists there? Also a Ramon Magsaysay awardee, Dr. Domingo, our former Secretary of Health, Dr. Cabral, Dr. Edsel Salvania, who is now one of the biggest names in social media about COVID-19, and G. Solante, one of the IATF also. And look at this, so many people. We have a congressman, we have the PMA president now, we have so many people working together to build the alliance and advocacy, because we realize we do need to restore vaccine confidence among Filipino doctors to unite and help restore this. Because engaging them, even that's Dr. Maria Wilda Silva, our National Immunization Manager, who is so, I appreciate her. She really works hard. House-to-house campaign for the polio just recently started. And now she says she's going to have to do another measles campaign, just so our country will become what it used to be in 1990 during the time of Dr. Juan Flavier, my idol in vaccination, where we had 100% vaccine coverage, sometimes reports of 101% pa nga. It was really so, we were, among Asians, we were the country who had vaccination at the forefront. We were the envy of our neighbors. But now, unfortunately, we need to really work, do a lot of things now to improve vaccination coverage. We need to help one another develop the strategies to improve vaccination coverage, to establish this and restore this vaccine confidence. We need to participate and contribute ideas and identify specific actions. And of course, we need ideas that may be innovative, definitely very collaborative. And maybe these initiatives would also be fresh. Look around you, think out of the box. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I am a pediatrician of 45 years. I want to be the voice of our children and our grandchildren. I have 6, by the way. So they can live longer and healthier lives. They do not have the voice. Please, they have the right to survive. And your voice, mind you, the work that is being done to restore vaccine confidence is massive. And I do hope that you will all help each other. We in the Philippine Foundation for Vaccination will be happy to lend our voice and to welcome any one of you who will help us with restoring vaccine confidence and making our country vaccine resilient, meaning to say whatever happens, we can face the challenges that Dengvaxia did to destroy our country's vaccine confidence. This COVID that is now damaging our economy, and we need a vaccine right away to immediately bring back the economy. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bravo. Okay. If anyone in the audience has questions, you can kindly put them in the chat box below. We will try to accommodate as much as possible if time permits. Okay, we have a question here from Ruben Lanuzo. Doc, is getting a pneumonia vaccine and flu vaccine recommended in preventing COVID-19?
Pneumonia vaccine, there are many. These are measles, pertussis, HIV, and of course the PCV. These were the vaccines against pneumonia. They do not prevent COVID-19, right? But they can be useful in order to prevent complications if ever you get COVID-19, and also to stop you from, at least to avoid you from getting tested for COVID, when in fact it's very expensive to get COVID-19, by the way. Test, it can cost you as much as 8,000, right? Because if you get pneumonia, you get cough, you get fever, you have to be tested because you don't know whether it's COVID or pneumonia, simple pneumonia, or at least the pneumonia from measles, HIV, or pertussis. And the same thing with diarrhea, because in children, COVID can cause pneumonia and diarrhea. And since you don't know, you have to be tested. See, it helps you to avoid being tested many times. It avoids the complications that can arise when you have COVID-19. So it's also important that we get the vaccines that we need in order to lessen the burden of COVID, right? I hope that answers that question. And there are many vaccines that can actually, as I said, measles, pertussis, HIV, and PCV are the vaccines against pneumonia. And for diarrhea, you have also measles and the rotavirus vaccine, which are very important to be given to children. So thank you. That's it.
Okay,
Unless
Doc.
there's a follow-up question on that.
There's no follow-up question, Doc. But we have here a second question and possibly our last. From Rose Ann Rosales. Are we entering the herd immunity phase? If so, will the vaccine be no longer given to those communities?
In terms of which disease? Because herd immunity is specific for every disease. So when you say, are we entering the herd immunity of what disease? If you are thinking COVID, we are not. The positivity rate for the tests that have been shown is as high as 10%, but in some areas, it's only less than 1%. So we are not even close. We're just starting for COVID. But in other diseases like measles, right, in some areas, there could already be herd immunity because they have been able to get vaccination to as much as 95%. But in areas where vaccination has not been implemented very efficiently, then that's a hot spot for outbreaks. And we know for a fact that it happens mostly in the South. But at least I know that in many areas in NCR, they have done a lot of house-to-house vaccination. And so we are actually able to bring about herd immunity. Now, as I said, what particular disease are we talking about now? If it's polio, again, we are now in the verge of we are polio free, by the way, but we have had outbreaks because in some instances, children are not getting vaccinated, and the vaccines that and the polio has been shown to be found in sewerage, and some have actually developed poliomyelitis. We have to go back to doing polio vaccination. Massive polio vaccination campaign are being done right now. And even the private sector should actually cooperate so that our children will be able to get a whole massive campaign for polio. There's a question here from, I see this, Gian Jimenez. Do you see it, J.O.? I read it from the chat box.
Yes, Doc. But I'm afraid we don't have much time.
Yeah, but I really want to answer that because it says, does strengthening the pharmacovigilance system boost vaccine confidence? This is in response to the misconception brought about by the Dengvaxia incident. Yes, in fact, we do have AEFI committees that really look at adverse events. In any new vaccine, this is actually in place. So surveillance, vigilance are all part of the system of introducing new vaccines. And what we need is really for our people to understand what it means when you have a new vaccine introduced, what it means to really be able to strengthen the adverse event following immunization surveillance system. Even now, we need a surveillance system for the polio campaign. It's all there. It should be important. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, Doc. Thank you very much, Dr. Bravo. If there are no more questions, let us go on to our next speaker. Thank you, Dr. Bravo. Okay. Our next speaker is a highly trained infectious disease with a Master of Science and Diploma in Clinical Tropical Medicine from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in the University of UK, and certified by both the Royal College of London, UK, and the Philippine Board of Internal Medicine and the Philippine Board of Microbiology and Diseases. A public health expert with extensive experience in program implementation of tuberculosis and control of emerging infections through several years of work at the Department of Health, particularly during the SARS epidemic in 2003, and program evaluator commissioned by the USAID for the Infectious Disease Control Program of the Department of Health in 2000. Please welcome the Executive Director of the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development, Dr. Jaime C. Montoya. Doctor, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. On behalf of the Department of Science and Technology and the Subtechnical Working Group on Vaccine Development, it is my pleasure to educate you, all of you, on a topic that is very relevant to us right now. I would also like to thank the Department of Health and the APO for organizing this event. In addition to Dr. Lulu Bravo's presentation earlier, I am here to talk about the concepts behind clinical trials in a simple way, so a lot of people will understand better why we are doing clinical trials. Dr. Lulu Bravo has mentioned about how important it is to have vaccines to provide protection to vulnerable groups and the general population against infectious agents. And it is very relevant and timely today because we're talking specifically about COVID-19 and the SARS coronavirus 2, which is the causative agent of COVID-19. Let me now start by giving you a simple definition of the term. Next slide, please. Clinical trials are defined as medical studies that involve people. It is a means of or process of evaluating the safety, kung ligtas ba yung bakuna, immunogenicity, the ability to stimulate antibodies, so kakayahan ng tao na mag-produce o gumawa ng antibodies na panlaban sa infeksyon, and protective efficacy in humans, yung abilidad o kakayanan ng bakuna na proteksyonan tayo sa pagkakaroon ng sakit. It is a novel vaccine which is usually tested and undergo clinical trials for this purpose. The primary goal of clinical trials is to explore whether a vaccine, a candidate vaccine, or an investigational vaccine are safe and effective for humans. Next slide. But why do we need to involve people? Well, first of all, people are the ones who will stand to benefit the most from a vaccine. People are the ones who are at risk, and people should be protected against infection. And this will be made possible by a vaccine. It is also the primary way to find out if a new treatment, drug, or vaccine is safe and effective in preventing or treating human illness. Next slide, please. Before any new medical product, like a vaccine, is tested on humans, it is first tested on animals. Of course, animals are not exactly like humans, but they can give us an idea of how the vaccines will behave when they get to be tested or used by humans. For example, animal studies can tell you whether it can be effective in stimulating antibodies, and it can also give you an idea of what possible side effects may happen if given to a human person. Although it doesn't always happen that way, but at least we will have an idea of the efficacy, effectivity, and safety of the vaccine before it gets to humans. After the animal trials, or what we call preclinical phase, we then go to the 3 phases of what we call clinical trial, because this time it will involve humans. These have different purposes, and they have different ways of being conducted. For example, for phase 1, this will usually involve 10 to 100 people, and the people are going to be tested when given the vaccine to find out whether it is safe or whether they develop certain side effects or adverse reaction. For phase 2, this is given to about 100 to probably at the most 1,000 people, and it is done to assess the efficacy, again, the safety of the vaccine, and also to find out the dose, ganong karami o ganong kataas ang dami ng bakuna na ibibigay to produce the desired effect. For example, in the case of vaccines, we may have to find out how many times it will be given or should be given. Will it require a booster dose, for example? Or how much of the antigen or part of the agent should be put into the vaccine in order to produce the best effect on people? For phase 3, it usually involves a larger group of people, and this is of course more than 1,000, many thousands, several thousands, and they're tested to confirm the efficacy that has already been shown in the phase 2 and safety, which was also shown by phase 1 and to some extent also by phase 2. So by the time a vaccine reaches phase 3, it would have gone through phase 1, which determines the safety, and phase 2, which determines the efficacy, how much of the dose or the vaccine will be given, and what the desired effects are seen as part of the effects of the vaccine on the human population. Next slide, please. So what benefits will we get from participating in clinical trials? Clinical trials are important for discovering new treatments for diseases, new ways of preventing diseases if it is actually a vaccine, as well as new ways to detect, diagnose, and reduce the chance of developing the disease. They also show researchers what does and doesn't work in humans that cannot be learned in the laboratory or in animals, as has been shown by what we call the animal studies or preclinical trials. Clinical trials also help doctors decide if the side effects of a new treatment or a vaccine are acceptable when weighed against the potential benefits. We do understand that whether a medical drug is used or a vaccine is used, it is not entirely safe. There are actually side effects that will be seen. However, we hope and we want only those medicines and those vaccines that have minimal side effects, so that the side effects are far outweighed by the potential benefit that can be provided for by the product. In this case, the protection provided by the vaccine outweighs all of the minor or minimal side effects that the vaccine may produce on the human person. Next slide, please. Now, what are the risks to consider when you undergo or participate in a clinical trial? Remember that when we do a clinical trial, we follow what we call a protocol, which actually tells us how to conduct the trial. Clinical trials are experimental, so there is always a possibility that the vaccines may not work. And in some other trials as well, there is no guarantee that you will be able to receive the vaccine because you might be included in what we call the placebo group. When we say placebo group, these are the people who will not receive the active vaccine, but may appear to receive one like it, and that is what we call a placebo, so that they will not know whether they are receiving the active vaccine or the placebo, which does not contain the active ingredient. This is done in order to avoid bias in terms of perception of effects or even side effects by both the participant and the researcher. There is also a possibility that the new vaccine may cause some side effects. and in some extreme cases, adverse effects. But the patient will be informed about this. The person who's going to participate in the trial will be informed about this. And because by the time they reach this stage, they would have gone through phase 1 and phase 2, as I said before, phase 1 for safety and phase 2 for efficacy, we are almost sure that by the time they reach phase 3, we will have only minor side effects, which will not really be dangerous to the health of the participant. You may also not be part of the treatment group, as I said, that gets the new treatment. And instead, you may be part of the control group, which gets the standard treatment or no treatment, or what we call placebo, that is inert but safe. So these are the things that we have to consider when we participate in a clinical trial. Next slide, please. Is it safe for people? As I said, before any clinical trial is allowed to be conducted in the country, a rigorous review process is followed by the FDA and partner evaluators to ensure the safety of the trial. For example, in this case, during this COVID-19 pandemic, we'll be doing phase 3 clinical trials for the COVID-19 vaccine. And as I said again previously, that when they reach phase 3, they would have already finished phase 1, which is the test for safety, and phase 2, which is the test for efficacy, and also a way of determining the right dose to be given to the participants. It is also important to note that medical care is ensured for participants for the whole duration of the trial. While there are inherent risks in human research, positive participant outcomes are the top priority for all people involved. As I always say, when you participate in a clinical trial, you do not only do it for yourself, but you also do it for your community, for the country, and the whole society at large. Why? Because you're contributing to the community of knowledge that will actually be the basis for determining what vaccines will be given to us or what vaccines will be appropriate for Filipinos to be protected against disease, in this case, against COVID-19. Next slide, please. So how are the rights and safety of the participants ensured? In the Philippines, we have a designated ethics review board. What does the ethics review board do? Aside from the technical evaluation, which will be done on the trial protocol, the ethics committee will ensure that the vaccine is safe based on the results of the phase 1 and to some extent the phase 2 trials, and that the all mechanism or all support is in place to ensure that just in case an adverse effect happens during the conduct of the vaccine trial, the participants will be managed and the problems addressed as well. Together with this, the protocol will also be evaluated by what we call a vaccine expert panel, whose main function is to evaluate the scientific merit of the vaccine itself. It is a basic norm among ethicists and even among technical people that if a protocol or a research study is not scientifically valid or not based on a strong scientific base or foundation, it is unethical. So now you realize that before a trial is approved and allowed to be conducted in our country, this should have undergone both technical review and ethics review. This will then be also reviewed by the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, which is the agency mandated to approve or allow or issue the permit for the conduct of clinical trials for any specific medical product in the country. The FDA will strictly and carefully examine any clinical trial with the primary goal of protecting and ensuring the safety and welfare of the Filipinos. Researchers are required to follow strict rules to make sure that participants are safe. Among them, for example, we need to be sure that the researchers have the expertise and the experience to do so. Not anyone can actually be allowed to do a research or a clinical trial at that. They have to be people who are experienced. Usually they are asked for a certificate that will guarantee that they've undergone training on good clinical practice. These are ways of ensuring that researches are done in the highest quality of scientific validity to ensure personal safety of the participants. Next slide, please. What about joining in clinical trials? I have always been asked, clinical trials, are you asked to participate in a trial? Can you volunteer to be a participant in a clinical trial? Well, whatever the case may be, if you plan to join a clinical trial, or if you're approached to participate in a clinical trial, the most important thing that has to be accomplished before you can actually join a clinical trial is what we call an informed consent, or what we usually call free prior informed consent. Free because it is voluntary, meaning you are not going to be forced or coerced to participate in the trial. Prior, because you have to be provided all of the needed information for you to make the right decision. And what information is this? It may be information about what is the investigational treatment, how is the study going to be done based on the research protocol, what are the risks and benefits of joining the trial, and of course, what are the rights of the volunteer or the participants. This will ensure that they fully understand and they agree to be part of the clinical trial. And that will be based on their own free, uninfluenced decision. And having an informed consent will also specifically state that a trial participant, when part of the trial, can decide not to continue on with the trial at any point for whatever reason, without compromise to the medical care that he or she is supposed to receive as part of the clinical trial. Next slide, please. It is crucial that we know the benefits and risks of any clinical trial before participating in the trial. So it's very important that we have to educate everyone, and that includes all of you and all of us, because all of us can be potential participants in a vaccine trial. We have to understand the principles behind the participation in a clinical trial so that we can make the right, free, prior, informed consent to participate in such a trial. But we have to also understand that participation in a clinical trial is very important. It will not only help us identify how we can actually protect ourselves from a disease, but it can also help identify vaccines that will be effective or vaccines that will most benefit a particular group of people. For example, some vaccines may actually benefit more the young people more than the old people. Or maybe some vaccines may benefit more people with underlying illness or people who do not have underlying illness. So these are some of the things or information that can be generated by a clinical trial. Next. I hope that I was able to give you a brief overview of what clinical trials are and how important it is in our quest to find what is the most appropriate vaccine that can be given to Filipinos for us to be protected against COVID-19. And if I may quote from the speech of Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, he keeps on emphasizing that no one is protected until everyone is protected. Thank you very much for your attention and time.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Montoya. Okay. If anyone in the audience has questions, kindly put them in the chat box below, and we will try to accommodate them if time permits. Okay, we have our first question here, Doc. From Christian Yosores. How is the negotiation between our officials going regarding the possibility of advance payment to some vaccines? We know that under the procurement law, advance payment to items is prohibited.
Thank you very much for your question. You know, the vaccine procurement is a process that is separate from the clinical trials. So what I'm saying is, I am part of the sub-technical working group on vaccine development. We are the ones who actually oversee the clinical trials until it is approved by the Food and Drug Administration. But what happens after that and how governments are able to procure it, like how will the Philippine government procure it, the group that is in charge of that is the sub-technical working group on procurement, which is actually being headed by the Department of Health. So I will defer to that particular committee to answer your question because this involves a lot of policy issues, which I think they are in the best position to answer.
Okay, Doc. We have a second question here. Has the vaccine expert panel and the sub-technical working group on vaccines discussed the plans if ever there are serious adverse effects that can be reported among patients while the vaccine trials are ongoing?
As I mentioned previously, all clinical trials have to provide the mechanism by which the people are provided support and the appropriate medical management just in case they develop adverse effects or side effects. So that is part of the clinical trial, and that will be provided for by the trial itself. So the Ethics Review Board will not approve a clinical trial unless those mechanisms are in place and has to be readily available when it happens. Meaning if a person who is part of the trial or participating in the trial develop minor effects or adverse effects, then they have to be supported and managed accordingly.
Okay, Doc. I think we don't have any more questions. Okay, if there are no more questions, let us go on with our last speaker. Thank you
Thank you
again,
very
Dr.
much.
Montoya. Okay. Let's proceed to our last speaker. Our last speaker graduated from the University of the Philippines, Manila College of Medicine under the Intermed program in 1992. He had his residency training in ophthalmology at the Department of Ophthalmology of the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital from 1993 to 1995, and his diplomate in ophthalmology given by the Philippine Board of Ophthalmology in 1997. As a public servant, he has served as the Chief of Staff and Undersecretary for Health Regulation of the Department of Health from 2017 to 2019, the Chief Operating Officer and Medical Director at Qualimed Manila in 2016, University Researcher 2 at the Philippine Eye Research Institute, UP Manila, the Director of the Philippine General Hospital in 2010, the Deputy Director for Administration of the Philippine General Hospital from 2007 to 2009, and the Assistant Secretary for Health Regulation and External Affairs Cluster of the Department of Health from 2001 to 2003. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome the Director General of the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Rolando Enrique D. Domingo. Doctor, the floor is
Hi.
yours.
Yeah, good afternoon, Jayo. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for organizing this. Hi, Jimmy and Dr. Bravo. Let me just give you a short, like an introduction on how we regulate vaccines and vaccine trials in the Philippines, particularly at the Food and Drug Administration. Next slide, please. So I think Dr. Montoya already briefly gave us an introduction to this. This is how we develop a vaccine. Usually it takes a vaccine 7 to 10 years to be developed. However, with the COVID-19 vaccine, everything is accelerated because all of the scientists in the whole world and all of the countries are really coming together. And we are getting a lot of volunteers for clinical trials, which makes it faster. So if you want a clinical trial to be quicker and get results quicker, you want more people participating. If you have less participants, then you have to keep on enrolling and it takes years to develop. Now, when you have from the preclinical to the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials and then approval, that would take, that would be the whole spectrum until you get an approval for a license for to use a product, or what we call a certificate of product registration here in the Philippines. That's the time that you can get a license or the authority to market a product. Now at the FDA, we regulate two things when it comes to vaccine development. We regulate or allow or give permission to do clinical trials. In this case, the clinical trial phase 3. After the safety and efficacy has more or less been established, you want to do the trial in a lot more patients who are exposed to possible infection and to see its effect in the world. Now, after phase 3 clinical trials, we approve that and we monitor that. We also regulate approval. Meaning after the phase 3 clinical trial is completed and the results are favorable and they show that the vaccine is really safe, they show that the vaccine is effective at a certain level that will make it useful as a vaccine in the future against COVID-19, then they will have to register with FDA and apply for a certificate of product registration or what we call a marketing authorization. So these are two separate, two separate applications and two separate permits that the FDA gives. Next slide, please. So we have we have a policy on the regulation of clinical trials. So just to make it clear, the FDA regulates clinical trials, meaning we approve them, we monitor them up to the end. But the FDA does not do clinical trials. Clinical trials is done by clinical researchers. They are the ones who apply for permission to FDA. When we take a look at the clinical trial, we have to ensure, of course, the full protection of human rights. I think we cannot overemphasize this, as Director Jaime Montoya has already said. Nobody can be forced to join a clinical trial. It has to be done voluntarily. You have to know exactly the possible risks, the possible benefits, and you cannot, yung hindi mo pwedeng ma-force, especially the marginalized members of society. For example, yung poverty should not be used as a weapon to entice people to join a clinical trial, which means where their clinical trialists are prohibited from giving payments or remuneration that would entice people to do it. No? Kailangan talagang out of your goodness of your heart and of you wanting to join and to generate new information and help in the development of this vaccine. They have to be well protected. And like I think one of the questions kanina is what happens if there's a signal. For example, during the clinical trial, you see one possible serious adverse event or at least a suspicious serious adverse event. Then that's when there's a committee that comes in that takes a look. You have to stop everything first. They take a look if it's related to the vaccine, and then they decide. If it's not related to the vaccine, then you continue. But if it's related to the vaccine, then they can also decide to stop a trial completely at any time. And any person who has joined a clinical trial can opt to leave that clinical trial at any time. No? Hindi yan pag pumayag ka na, kailangan hindi ka na pwedeng umayaw. At any time that you decide otherwise, na kahit na umuo ka na, pumirma ka na ng consent, pero nung iineksyonan ka na, biglang nagbagong isip mo, a clinical trial participant can always say no at any point, no, at any time. And of course, we have to harmonize with international good clinical practices. So anybody who's doing a clinical trial must have the credentials to do it, must have the training, must have the clinical experience to do it before we even allow them to do a clinical trial, especially on vaccines which we are giving to healthy people and a vaccine that has never been used before. Next slide, please. So who can apply to do a clinical trial? Not anybody can apply for a clinical trial license. It's not like one of the experiments that we do during siguro undergrad years or even in med school, wherein you just do an experiment in the laboratory and you just design it. If you're doing it on humans, we are very, very strict. First of all, if you want to sponsor a clinical trial, you have to get a license to operate as a clinical trial sponsor or a clinical research organization with an FDA. You have to show us all the documents that that show that the members of this clinical research organization are competent and that they have the training for a clinical research, that they know what to do. You have to have an office. You have to have the methods and the processes in your office to show us that you know what to do when you are sponsoring a clinical trial. So once you have a clinical research organization and you want to do it, you have to submit a complete submission of documentary requirements, meaning all of the technical dossiers, all of the technical information pertaining to the product. In terms of yung COVID-19, may extra step pa tayo dito. The DOST has created a vaccine expert panel that will take a look at the phase 1 and phase 2 data of the COVID-19 vaccine candidates before they even pass on to us they endorse to us the application. So may pre-screening pa tayo. Sisiguraduhin muna ng mga expert natin na talagang maganda yung safety profile and efficacy profile ng vaccine na to before they can even submit their application to FDA. Next slide, please. So after that, meron tayong scientific, technical, and administrative evaluation. So we check the research design. Of course, the ethics review would have been completed by then. Make sure that the ethics of the study are sound, and that patients are taken care of, and everything is done to assure their safety, And then of course the documents, kasi the FDA, for example, you cannot just bring in experimental drugs into the Philippines. They have to have each and every shipment of these vaccines will need to have a permit from the FDA to be brought in because these are unlicensed products. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of reviewing that will be done. And of course, we have regulatory reviewers to do that. So we have technical experts who will look at the procedure, at the protocol, the methodology of the whole trial, and then we have people looking at the technical papers, the dossiers of the vaccine candidate, and then of course the administrative people, we also have a team doing that. Next slide, please. So after that, no, the decision is going to be made. No, hindi lahat ng mag-a-apply for a clinical trial will be approved. No, it's not an assurance that just because you apply, you're going to get an approval to do a clinical trial. If we see, if you have any doubts on the safety and efficacy of a product, then we don't even let it to go on to a clinical trial phase 3 here in our country. And once we make a decision, it's either an approval or a disapproval. Disapprovals have happened before, Malat. And of course, ang common causes is you have, falsified documents, you misinterpret it when you tell us something, but the data tells us something else, no? When you withhold any material data or information from us, and then we find it from another source. So pag ganyan, nakita natin na meron talaga tayong duda, we do not approve it. Next slide, please. But some of them will really get approved, no? So once they are approved and we know that the safety nets are there, the clinical trial sponsor or the clinical research organization will have certain responsibilities. So number one, they have to upload the information in the clinical trial registry within 30 calendar days after receipt of the clinical trial approval. So there's a clinical trial registry of the Philippines online. So this is completely transparent. Once approved siya, kailangan mag-upload siya doon. And then they have to update the data continuously, regularly. They have to give us regular progress reports. So we have, they tell us what's happening, how the patients are, if there are any adverse events, and then what happened to those adverse events. They have to give us safety reporting. The sponsor is responsible for expediting and reporting all suspected, unexpected, serious adverse reactions to the FDA in compliance with international standards. So merong committee, no? In case the DOH sponsored, for example, government sponsored yung trial, like the WHO Solidarity Trial, the DOST is creating a committee that will take a look at any unexpected or suspected serious adverse events. But for private companies who do it, they are also required to get third party na mga committees that will take a look and check the safety profile and double check and assess any possible adverse events. And then they will report to FDA, and then the FDA will also do an assessment so that we know if we have to stop it, to pause it, or if we continue with the trial. And then, of course, once it's completed, the clinical research organization has the obligation to terminate the clinical trial. So yung termination, meron din yun na tatapusin, what will happen to the patients, for example, afterwards, ano ba yung magiging follow-ups nila after the trial is completed. And then, of course, we also do regular inspections. We have a team of inspectors who will regularly go to the clinical trial site and see how everything's being done, make sure everything's going up to standard, and that, of course, all the patients are doing well. Next slide, please. So while the sponsor or the clinical research organization is doing the study, there are things that they are not allowed to do. No? Yung iba kasi masyado silang excited. So, habang ginagawa pa yung pagsusuri o yung pag-aaral, the CRO or the sponsor cannot promote the investigational product as safe and effective. Because definitely, the reason why we're doing the studies because we're not yet sure how safe and effective that product is. And until that is completed and until their product is registered with the FDA, that's the only time that they can say that the product is safe and effective. So hindi pwede yung kung nakikita nyo ngayon may mga ibang mga vaccine companies. Of course, kunyari parang news, parang nag-uunahan silang pakita na pinakamaganda, pinaka-safe, pinaka-effective yung bakuna nila, no? Pero yung lantaran talaga na bawal yun, hindi pwedeng mong i-promote yung produkto mo while it's still under investigation. Definitely, they cannot sell the products. You cannot sell an unregistered product in the Philippines, and you cannot sell an investigational product. So, minsan, makakita kayo, meron ng gustong magbenta. Some, I've been seeing some, not in the Philippines, wala pa naman, but in the US, I've seen people peddling vaccines, for example, from other countries allegedly for COVID-19. So until now, there's no registered COVID-19 vaccine. And when these trials are ongoing, they cannot sell their products. Their products can only enter the country as investigational products and only for use within the study. They can also not unduly prolong an investigation after finding the investigation of the results to be sufficient. No? So, ibig sabihin, kapag nakita na nila talaga na mayroong safety problem or talagang inefficient siya, hindi nila pwedeng pahabain ng pahabain in the hope na you will get better results as more people are enrolled. At the same time, you have that option when even if you plan to do it, for example, in 30,000 patients, but in 3,000 patients, you already see that it's really safe and effective. You don't have to prolong it. You can stop it and then you can approve it and you can already apply for approval and marketing authorization. So once you have proven, no, either that the product is good or is not good, you can terminate it and then you can either market it, get a marketing authorization, or really just withdraw that product. Next slide, please. So basically, after they complete the clinical trial phase 3, assuming no, that it turns out that the results are good, we have to warn everybody that not all clinical trials will result in a product that will be allowed to be marketed and registered in the Philippines. But if the results are good, after the clinical trial phase 3, they can then register the product, and then we can give it a certificate of product registration under monitored release. And at the first few years that it's being used, we will monitor closely how it is, and they have to report to us regularly if there are any unusual or any long-term side effects that they will find, so that we can include this as part of what we call the clinical trial phase 4, which is a post-marketing surveillance of a registered product. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Domingo. If anyone in the audience has any questions, kindly put them in the chat box below. We will try to address them if time permits. Okay, we have our first question here from Gian Jimenez. Dr. Domingo, what are the criteria of providing expanded access to certain meds?
Yeah, we have expanded access to certain meds that are still under clinical trial, no, unregistered. For example, what we call yung remdesivir, no. So this is one of the drugs that is being investigated for COVID-19, and interim results of the ongoing study show that it is really point to the possibility that it's beneficial. So pag yung pasyente wala nang ibang gamot na maibigay, and then we have early results showing that this drug is useful, then what we can do to increase, to expand access to it outside of joining the clinical trial is they can apply for a compassionate use permit with the FDA. So if a drug is an experimental drug, an investigational drug, and the interim results show that they are useful, we do allow expanded access to compassionate use.
Okay, thank you, Doc. We have a second question here from Al Nasef Jumlail. With the urgent need for a vaccine for COVID-19, how do these vaccine candidates follow the protocols required during clinical trials, and what are the free passes granted to these research laboratories and big pharma companies in order to hasten the development of vaccines?
Yeah, well, first of all, there are no free passes. No, definitely. I think this is what even the WHO espouses, that we cannot sacrifice safety for speed. No, the worst thing to have is a bad vaccine or a poor vaccine. No vaccine is better than having a poor vaccine that will lead to problems later on. Either if it's poor efficacy, parang wala rin naman effect, magbabakuna tayo, walang effect. Or if it's a safety issue, then it will ruin, no, and really just destroy the confidence of people in vaccines. So there are no free passes. it's getting faster because so many people are working on it all at the same time and all together. And there are a lot of people volunteering for the studies. But we are following each and every procedure in the same way as any other vaccine trial in the past. Even during registration, no? Ang nagkataon lang dito talaga, sabay-sabay kasi nagtutulungan lahat kaya bumibilis. But we are going through all the same process.
Okay, Doc, we have a third question. What are the key strategies to gain the trust of Filipinos in vaccination?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Jayon?
Hello, Doc. What are the key strategies to gain the trust of Filipinos in vaccination?
Yeah, well, I think number one is an education campaign, on information campaign. That's what we're really working on to remind everybody how useful, how effective, no, and how many lives vaccines have saved. We have to remind everybody that we all have to participate. Like Director Jimmy said, no, nobody is safe until all of us are safe. Kailangan lahat tayo mababakunahan. And of course, strengthening the confidence in the regulation. Kailangan maniwala sila na kapag dumaan yan sa FDA, naaral natin ang gusto at na talagang nasiguro natin ang safety at saka efficacy. So I think we're working with the DOH, with the DOST, PCHRD, with the academe like Dr. Lulu Bravo, the experts have been there for so many decades, and trying to approach this from all angles, no? Because we really have to increase the confidence of people on vaccines.
Okay, I think there are no more questions. Okay, if there are no more questions, that concludes the question and answer portion and the webinar as well. I would like to thank the audience for participating and asking questions, and to our resource speakers, Dr. Lulu Bravo, Dr. Jaime Montoya, and Director General Enrique Domingo, taking their time to discuss these matters to the public and for giving clarity in the vaccine clinical trials to be conducted in the country. Now let's proceed to the last part of this webinar, which is closing remarks. Let me welcome Dr. Cristel May Cuevas of the Department of Health Promotion Bureau for the closing remarks.
Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar on COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials in the Philippines was very informative, and I hope you were able to get some good takeaways from today's session. So we are so thankful to have had the chance to talk and learn more about vaccines and vaccine trials. So in behalf of the HPB, we'd like to express our gratitude to Alpha Phi Omega for arranging this webinar, and to our esteemed speakers, Drs. Bravo, Montoya, and Domingo, for sharing their time and expertise with us so that we can understand vaccines and clinical trials a bit more. So this is very timely, especially now that we are hearing more and more news about them. So the race to find the COVID-19 vaccine and other solutions to this pandemic has really brought together the international scientific and public health communities. So for a lot of us, it has been very inspiring to see this level of cooperation in the international community of this magnitude. So the DOH is fully supportive of these initiatives through the DOST, FDA, and other agencies to join the global effort to creating the vaccine for COVID-19. So as was mentioned through our different discussions, we know and have seen that vaccines work before, helping control many other infectious diseases, providing protection to persons and their families. And we're hopeful that we can see something similar for COVID-19. And while that's still under question, we recognize that in getting to that point, clinical trials are a necessary step. So there are many questions about them. We're thankful we've had our experts help clarify some of those concerns. The strict international guidelines and regulation process, the emphasis on participant safety and rights, and the fact that some of our best doctors and experts are really looking closely into this process is reassuring. So hopefully for some of us, Now that we know more about clinical trials and how they work, if the time comes that we can contribute in that way, that we will be willing to participate. So I hope today was very fruitful for everyone and that we're coming out of this with more information and knowledge than we did coming in. So while we explore the different possible solutions to this pandemic, such as the vaccines through these trials, this is a friendly reminder to continue practicing the minimum health standards of physical distancing, hand hygiene, and wearing of face masks. So stay safe, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our experts and our speakers, and thank you to APO. All right, have a good afternoon, everyone.
Ayoko.